Ahoy.
Hi.
I think you're getting really good at that. It gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce Ross Gordon Noel. He was born and raised in Toronto. He attended Don Mills Collegiate and graduated from the Ryerson Business Program in 1984, majoring in information technology. His career in IT spanned 3 decades and multiple industries, including manufacturing, telecom, finance, and public utilities. He has held management roles in several Canadian banks and is also a certified PMP, Project Management Professional.
With you, Vice President.
Ah, okay. Meanwhile, Ross moved westward to Mississauga and eventually settled in Old Port Credit in 2014 with his wife Lisa and their 5 children, now well into their 20s and 30s. Following his passion for beer and large projects, Ross embraced the craft beer movement and founded Stonehookers Brewing Company in February of 2016. The brewery was built on the lakeshore, just east of Port Credit, and opened in 2019 with 6 beer on tap, a tap room, a brand that pays tribute to the historical significance of a forgotten industry. Now in its 5th year of operation, Stonehooker is the proud brewery of award-winning beer with 53 recipes and many local favorites, all traditionally brewed with all natural ingredients. And Ross just told us the story of Hanlon's Point and a murder that happened over there over, what kind of beer was it?
Over stout.
Over stout. And that's a true story. An avid sailor, Ross maintains a keen interest in the history and culture of Port Credit and Lake Ontario. Please give Ross a warm showback welcome. Is that a remote one? Because you can lift it and turn things from where you're standing. Thank you.
I'll put it back on. Okay. Yeah, thank you, Diane, and thank you, Graham, for being the technical whiz here. And good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, Shellbacks. It's an honor and pleasure to be here. And everybody will enjoy the food. I'm sure it's going to be delicious, and it's really nice to be back at the National Club. I also belong to a club, but we don't have a dining room per se. We're a self-help club, Lakeshore Yacht Club. Little plug for Lakeshore. It's kind of a do-it-yourself thing there, self-help, and we do our own thing. But certainly we enjoy hosting other clubs, and we enjoy also being hosted. So thanks for having me. Supposed to be looking at that camera. I am going to show you a few images in preparation for today. I thought we'll introduce you to the story. And first of all, I guess, how many people know what a stonehooker is? Okay. All right. Yeah. Well, you've got a pamphlet on your this helps, I guess. This was prepared by the Mississauga, I guess it's called Heritage Mississauga. Matthew Wilkinson, he manages that. And they've been kind enough to supply us with these, and it works both ways. We promote the heritage of Mississauga, and the stonehooking story, the stonehooking industry is one of the key parts of their history. In fact, it's probably the most significant part of Port Credit's history, in that Port Credit was the center of the industry for the 90 years that industry was around. And the industry took place from basically Coburg through to Burlington Bay, but as far east as Belleville. So I'm gonna flip on some slides here and share my screen with you. You don't need to look at me. I've got more interesting stuff to look at here. Bear with me. The technology. It's kind of an auspicious occasion to be presenting the stonehooking here at the Western Gap, which is where a lot of pictures at the time were taking place. One of the interesting parts about the Stonehooker story is that the industry started up in the early 1800s, but carried on through the time when photography became a thing, it came into being. And so we do have pictures of stonehookers, their crews, their families, and so on. So it's a nice piece of history in the early days of photography. So I imagine a lot of the pictures were only taken from the shore. And consequently, one of the best vantage points to catch a picture of a stonehooker would be the Western Gap. So you may see a couple of slides here that are in the Western Gap. I'm going to play you a little video here that just, I don't know if I want to totally share my time with YouTube, but here goes.
The harbor was dark and the crews were gathering. Morning begins, the sun would hail. Young and old worked, there was no lamenting.
Go backwards here and just try this share thing again. Bear with me. Okay, I'm sharing some.
You'll have to turn off your volume.
Yeah.
The bottom would yield
My volume's
its
all the way up.
treasure
So,
by sail.
what I'll do is I'll leave you with this little bit. You can see this here. This is a YouTube video. It's called Dundas Shale. Dundas Shale set the heart of the story, as it was the Dundas Shale that was basically being quarried in the lake, became building material for several generations from the 1830s till about 1915. So this is a nice little video that has a song by Leonard Walsh, the late Leonard Walsh, called Dundas Shale. And it's kind of like a Neil Young kind of a tune. We'll flip out of that because obviously there's
asked
a
to
picture
portray a character
Leonard.
from the 19th
We
century.
can't hear him right now,
by the
so I
name
think
of,
we'll just
Walk,
go back to
Captain
the
Walk, by the Historical
to the
Society of
slides.
Mississauga. And, you know, they didn't have any real script for me to do, so I had to make up my own script. And I thought to myself, wow, I was reading some stuff, and I saw this really interesting phrase, Dundas Shale. And it reminded me, I'm a Neil Young fan, and it reminded me of Cellar Door. They both have sort of the same tonal values. Cellar work for a living, a lot harder than they work today.
All right.
It was hard work.
This is where the story
It was
began.
long work. I come from a very working class background. I worked in construction all my life,
Is that a
so
problem?
I sort of understood where these people would be coming from, you know? And it's tough, heavy work. I mean, these guys would get up early in the morning before the sun rose, and I could just see them in my mind, you know, that they get down to the harbor, everybody having a cigarette.
Sorry, Leonard. The story began on Lake Ontario, but before there was Lake Ontario, 300 million years ago, there was compression of clay, silt, became sedimentary rock, the Paleozoic age. And as time went on, we had glaciers, and we had a much bigger lake called Lake Iroquois, as many of you may be aware. And at one time there was a drainage of Lake Iroquois, and we had a much smaller lake called the Admiral Lake. You might recall there's the Admiral Islands in the Thousand Islands area. Admiral Lake was a smaller version of Lake Ontario. You can see the Lake Ontario shorelines here, and the Lake Iroquois shoreline was much bigger. So with this rise and fall of Lake Ontario water levels, there was a lot of upheaval of this layer of sedimentary rock known as Dundas Shale. So it was plentiful. It was it's all over southern Ontario, but it's unearthed and available in the lake. And to this day, there's a lot of Dundas Shale that's still sitting on the bottom. Most of the easy pickings were scooped up by stonehookers. It was the most available and most useful building material of its time. And it was the mainstay of construction for about 90 years. Once people figured out that, you know, after coming here from European climates and realizing that they had to put foundations in and dig down so their homes didn't heave. That's why there's not too many log cabins around. So they discovered foundations, and they realized they had to use stone. This was a plentiful supply of stone back in the 1800s with dirt roads and horse-drawn wagons. You didn't want to be the stone carrier on a road with a horse-drawn wagon. Instead, they built schooners specifically for the purpose, and people left their fishing jobs and their blacksmith jobs and all other manner of work to go and take part in a cash crop of loading stones onto a schooner and then sailing the schooner into Toronto. Sounds simple. I'm sure it was not. Obviously highly weather dependent and very hard work. Really tough backbreaking work. Horrible conditions at times, dangerous. And so the stonehookers were the very hardworking people of their day, and because they worked hard and they were able to make a living this way, they were actually the ones that were able to afford to build a home in Port Credit. So as we go through the presentation, you'll see some of those homes that exist there. So going back in time again, this is back to the story of Gibraltar Point. Well, this is kind of interesting because here we've got Toronto Island as it was back in the very early 1800s, and you'll notice that Gibraltar Point is over here, not where we think it is now, out here, which I thought was kind of interesting. Of course, Fort York is here, and the story that Diane referred to was the story of the lighthouse keeper at Gibraltar Point, who was murdered by a couple of British Army regulars. And well, presumably murdered. They were taken to trial but never convicted, and as a result, the lighthouse is now haunted. So they say. You kind of get a sense of the shoreline there. So Toronto was a big part of the stone hooking story because it was the market for the stone. Toronto went from nothing, which I just showed you in the last slide, to by the end of the 1880s, it looked more like this map here. Tremendous amount of growth. population in 1813, when the Americans burned York. They came up here during the War of 1812. Population was about 700. Population by the end of the 1800s was 200 and close to 300,000. So enormous growth in the population, enormous boom in building, an insatiable need for stone. So this need was met by the stonehookers. Back up one. We got a map here of this is Toronto Township. It's an old map. Port Credit ended up being the ideal location for stonehooking, as all of you can appreciate who are sailors. If you were to load up the deck of your ship, and they did load the stone on the deck, they didn't put it in the hold, because that was just an extra pile of work. So the stone was loaded up on the decks of the schooners and then transported to market. Where's the market? Toronto. If you've got a load of 30 tons of stone on the deck of your schooner, what point of sail do you want to be on?
Run. Run or reach.
A run or a reach. Absolutely. You don't want to be, yeah, close hauled and heeled over. So that made Port Credit the ideal location for stonehooking, and it became the largest harbor for stonehookers, along with Bronte. Bronte Harbor was probably the second in that regard, because most of the time, of course, the wind comes from the southwest. So they would go out in the morning, they'd pull themselves out, they had no auxiliaries, they'd pull themselves out, they get out into the still waters, launch a yawl boat, and they'd row to shore or close to shore. They'd take whatever they could, put it on the rowboat, take it back to the stonehooker, load up, and once the waters, the wind picked up, of course, things start getting a little choppy out there, it's time to move. And they sail on a broad reach into Toronto, come in through the Western Gap, and unload at the Queen City Wharf, which is the foot of Bathurst Street. They recorded the unloadings at the Bathurst Street Wharf, and by the year 1900, they recorded over 1 million tons of stone that had been unloaded there. It was to the point where they actually had rail sidings, so they had rail cars go down. When the stonehookers came in, they'd load them directly into it. They tossed them into rail cars. I was going to bring some Dundas shale with me. I'll point out, I do have a couple of pictures in my deck that'll show you what that looks like, but I think I have one right coming up actually. I can move to the next slide here. Click the X.
Need to try.
There we go. Okay. So this is a little shot of our tap room at Stonehooker. If you get a chance to come by, we're on Lakeshore just east of Cawthra, and we have a nice little nautically inspired tap room. And as you can see, the bar here, it's facing a stone, and that is Dundas shale, and that was hooked out of the lake by yours truly. So I am a stonehooker. And you get a feel for what it is. It's the material is hand bombable. It was very seldom, I think, that they need a crane or something to pull it up. That might be a very large slab, but generally speaking, most of what they harvested was hand bombable, and they consequently just repetitive loading and over. But that's what it looks like. Stonehooking era was, as I said, a major part of Mississauga and Port Credit's history, but also the history of the North Shore of Lake Ontario. The industry did not exist anywhere else in the world. It's truly a piece of Canadiana. And we should all celebrate that. And it should be in our history books. Unfortunately, it's been largely forgotten. And we've taken on the role of trying to bring it back and remind people of this incredible industry of hardworking people that helped to build the city of Toronto. And of course, communities like Port Credit. All those old homes have stone foundations. If you've ever seen a home, I've been into a basement of a home in Toronto that's built before 1915. It'll most likely have a stone foundation unless it's been replaced. Usually they're parched over and people don't know about them until the contractor tries to put a dryer vent through and then has a hell of a time. So there's many of those houses still standing and many examples of those stone basements. So 1915 was an interesting year. It was the advent of concrete block. And concrete block signaled the end of the stone hooking era because basically the bottom fell out of the market. And that was really the end of the industry. Which kind of coincided with the end of a couple of other industries as well. Just to go back to that. So we're talking about World War I, or the Great War. That was really the end of the age of sail. The schooners on the lake gave way to the large freighters. 100 to 200 foot schooners. We're now competing with 600-foot freighters on the lake, the likes of the Ridgeway, for example, which otherwise known as the William E. Corey, which acts as the breakwater for the Port Credit Harbor. You may know that one. So that ship was built in 1905, and you can just imagine what it'd be like sailing a schooner and then running into that, especially knowing that they don't have radar at that time. So obviously it became more perilous out on the water. Another thing that happened, and this is parallel with the business that I'm in, is the beer industry. Brewing beer was something that was done locally. It was done in every town, maybe every village. And as a result, beer was brewed as an old-fashioned, all-natural product, as it is today by craft brewers. And there was over 200 breweries in Ontario at the time. But 1918, Prohibition began. And that signaled the end of the brewing industry for the time being. And for, what was it, 12 years, there was no beer allowed to be consumed or sold. I'm sure it happened anyway.
Legally.
Yeah, legally. So basically these two industries ran in parallel in terms of being at their height in the late 1800s and then disappearing before 1920. The brewing industry recovered eventually, but with only a couple of players. So we all grew up with 4 or 5 major brewers in Canada, and craft brewing didn't come out until really the 1990s and has become very popular since then. And a lot of people will talk about how the industry is, all this proliferation of breweries and it's saturating the market and all these kinds of comments. But when in fact the industry, when it's local, supports a large number of breweries because it goes back to the traditional local brewery that every village and town had at the time. So these two industries had that parallel. I don't think we're going to see a return to stone hooking anytime soon. It wasn't the best environmental practice, and a lot of the shoreline had to be rebuilt as a result. So the Stonehookers themselves had a number of interesting characteristics as sailing vessels. They were schooners. They usually had 2 masts. They were anywhere from 20 to 100 tons. They were typically shallow draft. A lot of them had retractable keels or dagger boards, and they were made to go into shallow waters. They liked to get in as close as they could, and a lot of them were just barges that they had schooner rigged. Basically, anything that they could find that would float and carry a lot of stone, they would rig it up, schooner rig, triangular sails, and so on, and allow it to be, as long as they can get to market, make it home. And in light winds, they can typically make it home fairly quickly, which brings us around to the persona of a stonehooker, and part of our brand archetype is that character who worked on these boats, the hookermen. They were your typical lake farers, lighthearted but hardworking, and they were day sailors. They weren't the guys that were out on the freighters for months at a time. They were typically, unless they were marooned as a result of the weather, they were typically day sailors. They'd get out as early as they could in the still waters, load up, go to Toronto, unload, and then make it back under sail, beating it up back into Port Credit or whatever harbor they came from, and enjoy the afternoon, wherever they'd end up, which we figured might have been the pub, and there might have been a beer connection there too. Here's a picture of these scallywags, sailors and captains. The captains, typically captain of the day, would wear a derby, and yeah. I'm not going to pick that up. This one's from 1885, a bunch of Coburg Lake sailors. This fellow here was a bit of a hero, and worth mentioning. There's a ship, schooner, Stonehooker, known as the Maple Leaf, which we've been fortunate enough to receive a model of this ship, and we have it over our bar. The Stonehooker that owned the ship, his name was Richard Goldring. There's a picture of him there with his wife, and it's just some of these stories, putting a face to these fellows and their families. He actually was awarded for saving lives, and he owned the Maple Leaf for its time, and he lived a full life as a stonehooker and worked out of the Whitby area.
96.
Yeah. So that's him and his wife in 1884, and thought we'd mention Richard because we have a model of his ship. They used to call him Little Dick. So this picture of the model there, that's the Maple Leaf. That's the one we have over our bar. The fellow in the picture is the late Fred Coots, who was a historian that made his passion was the stonehooking story, and he would go around from place to place to library presentations or presentations like this. Some of you may have even seen him present before. You have? Okay, sure.
We'll take questions.
Yeah, I better be careful of my time here. So we will take some questions for sure. So Fred, I found Fred. It's just a great, happenstance, serendipity. I thought, what are the chances that somebody's built a model stonehooker? So I found the Model Boat Building Society, asked the question, they connected me with Fred. As time went on, I got to know Fred, he got to know our project of opening a brewery, and the Stonehooker story was one that he was very near and dear to him. And he called me up one day and he said, Ross, I want to give you one of my Stonehookers. And these things he built this model completely from scratch. He spent $32 on raw materials. It's completely handmade. In my estimation, it's priceless. And he called me up one day and said, I want to give you my Stonehooker. And I just, after he hung up the phone, I looked at my partner and I said, our day's work is done. This is a great day, and this will be fantastic for us. So we because we've been acquiring some schooners to decorate our tap room, but we never thought we'd actually find a model Stonehooker. And here's a guy that had built 3 of them. And I guess in the course of the conversation, he was 80 and he wasn't prepared to build another one. However, he did bequeath this to us, and unfortunately he passed away about 1.5 years ago. So rest in peace, Fred Coops. As mentioned, Port Credit was the largest harbor or the center of the stonehooking industry on the north shore of Lake Ontario. Of course, that's where it existed. And it was a busy harbor. So this is the Port Credit Harbor. I'm sure most of you have been to the Port Credit Harbor at some point. This, I believe, is the Wilbur Hotel in the background here. And that's probably Canada Starch or something in the background there. St. Lawrence Starch, I guess. And the Port Credit Yacht Club would have ended up in there, which is now Snug Harbor. And this is what the stonehookers would be doing, I guess, when they were not stonehooking. There's always something to do. There's docks to maintain. There's the winter time they'd be carving ice for ice boxes and so on. Lots of families in Port Credit that made stonehooking their livelihood. There's generations of them. I've been approached by people who are descendants of those families. Some of them have bestowed artifacts on us so that we now have some great stories that we can share, and we also have some artifacts that we can display from this little trade. So this one crew here was the crew of the Lily, and the gentleman in the front here, the captain of that ship was Benjamin Lind. He was of Irish descent. His grandfather had come here from Ireland. I think his dad might have been born there. His father ran the Wilbur Hotel, and he took up stonehooking. He was probably working for stonehookers, probably a hookerman on crew, and then got to the point where he was able to afford his own ship. So he built a schooner, actually built the Lily, and became a stonehooker. And you can see he's back in those days you couldn't afford a camera, so you went, if you wanted to get your picture taken, you went to the exhibition. So that was taken from the C&E. And there's a picture of the Lily. Not a great picture, but a picture nonetheless. You will see that image in our logo. I don't have my logo on me, but if any of you have a coaster, yeah, there you go. So the schooner that's in our logo is the Lily. We chose the Lily and we chose Benjamin Lind for the simple reason that we could find the most information on Benjamin Lind and his family and his descendants. It was a story that was told, and there were a lot of photographs that were available to kind of document his life. And we've actually traced him right from birth through to his place of burial, which is in the Trinity Church yard at the cemetery in Port Credit. And he married a woman who was the daughter of James Robinson Shaw, who was one of the early pioneers in Port Credit. And if any of you know Port Credit, you'll know there's a road there called Shaw Drive. And actually in the Lakeview area, there's other roads and so on that are named after Benjamin Lind and his descendants. This is actually a picture of Benjamin Lind's daughter's son Garnet is here, and that's his wife Ida. This I believe this building was moved at one point, but it's no longer there. It's at the corner. It was at the corner of Mississauga Road, south corner where Natty's was. I think one of the Carlos Bakery is there now. And it's now a parking lot where that stood. But this next structure, which was where Benjamin Lind, he built his house in the early 1900s, I think after he probably retired from stonehooking and came into a little more wealth when his father-in-law passed away. So that was that building is also still standing on what was Joseph Street South, which is now Mississauga Road, south of Lakeshore. So you can see that home still standing there. There's a picture of Garnet Lind, so Benjamin Lind's son. He became a pillar of the community. He was, I believe he was an incumbent minister of the United Church for some 40 years. And he donated this list of stonehookers that were from Port Credit. You can see the list is quite long, and there's a lot of names and stories that go with that. So there is really countless stories about stonehooking. Port Credit. There's an image there of the I'm not sure which one this is, but that is the stonehooker coming into the Port Credit Harbor under full sail. This is a popular photo that I believe it's the lithophone. I can tell it's the lithophone because you can see it's got a barge bow on it. That's flat bow, and they've, in this case, they have a derrick out there, and they're hauling stones up from the shallow water using a crane or a derrick. Probably you'll see that one in your brochure. Here we are at the Bathurst Street Wharf, ready to unload. Once again, the Western Gap, this is a great vantage point to catch a picture of Stonehooker. That would be the one that's owned by Richard Golding, Gold Ring, Little Dick, and he'd be sailing through the gap there in the Maple Leaf, on board the Maple Leaf. Port Credit Harbor, back in those days and right through the 1800s, would be the site of the scene of many stonehookers harbored there. Stories of floods and so on where they had to move them quickly. But at times there would be up to 30 stonehookers in the harbor. It's another shot there of Port Credit Harbor. I believe that's the boat over there is the Lillian. Just another Port Credit vessel. So just as a note, there weren't many pictures taken on the deck of the ship. As you can appreciate, photography was in its early stages. But here's one, and I guess the interesting note here is that when they were returning from Queen City Wharf empty, there were many times they took the opportunity to take something back with them. Instead of deadheading, they would often transport gravel, coal, manure. That was the big one. I wouldn't want to be doing the cleanup after that, but apparently there was a lot of that available because the public transit in the day was all horse-drawn to a point, right? And so they had barns full of a plentiful supply of manure that the farmers in Port Credit and beyond would be very happy to take delivery of. So of course they'd move whatever it was they needed to move. These are just some of the names that come up with. There are also some of the ones in the brochure, but the Stonehookers had a lot of interesting names. Of course, with a lot of ships, they're named after women. And some of them were named after racehorses, like Newsboy and Lone Star. They liked their racehorses, so they used that quite a bit. And then some of them were named after their mothers or their grandmothers, and so on. That being named after a stonehooker was not always a flattering thing, because these ships were not pretty. They were pretty beat up. They were really worked hard, and they took a beating. I mentioned earlier that they pulled a lot of stone away from the shallows. Well, they also took a lot of stone off the shoreline. It was easy pickings, and it was all about getting as much stone as you could, because there was a need for that. The Scarborough Highlands, as they were at the time, became the Scarborough Bluffs because of all the stone that they took away from the base of the bluffs. So there was a lot of uproar over this. There was a lot of landowners that were complaining that their land was falling into the lake and so on. So they took this to the legislators, and they created the 3-rod law. So you were no longer allowed to harvest stone from within 3 rods. A rod being 16 feet from shore. Consequently, the stonehookers stopped putting their names on their transoms. It couldn't be identified. So when you see the stonehooker model that we have, that was one of Fred Coote's favorite points, is that there's no name on the transom. That's why. So we've thought about the historical significance and the opportunities that this creates, and you could run with this in terms of creating a museum entries. I think the idea of a museum in Mississauga has not really fully taken flight. There are some heritage buildings, and there's a heritage society, the Grange. They have a lot of artifacts in there, but it's not really a museum per se. I think that really is something that has yet to really take fruition. We've talked a lot about how we could commemorate the Stonehookers, and my partner at lunch today, Janice Alton, has been very instrumental in spearheading the idea, and we've worked together to try to put forward the idea of a monument or something to commemorate stonehooking. And we've actually even taken that as far as looking at the possibility of producing a scale stonehooker that would have to be built and operated as part of a brigantine type program. So it really became a discussion over not only building a ship, building a schooner, and all the engineering that has to go into that, which, by the way, by today's standards has to be Canadian government approved, which adds a lot of complication. But the more important, or as important as building the ship, would be operating it. If it's left to sit and get covered in birds and so on, that's not helping anybody. It's really the dream is to have an operating educational platform, a schooner where youth can learn how to sail, as they do with the tall ships that come into the Toronto area. Those ships are, I think, generally, if not always, operated by crews that are youth, usually 15 to 19 years old. They move up the ranks and become first mates and captains. And then those programs live on, and they take on a life of their own. So the
Richard Burchell.
right, okay, there you go. So brigantine programs one. They're on the West Coast. There's another one that's very successful out there, and they're in the process of building a schooner. They've got the Pacific Swift, and there's a couple of others. And so that's another whole program and a whole discussion that Janice and I have frequent conversations about. My business usually takes up most of my day, or if not more than that. So we haven't moved it as far as we'd like to, but we'd like to move the needle on that. And it may involve people who are interested and organizations who are interested, and one of them is Broadreach. So I'll plug Broadreach, I'm plugging Broadreach, I'm plugging the idea, and we think it's got great potential. Just as an example of the historical impact of the stonehooking industry, most of the homes that are still standing from the 1800s that are in the Port Credit area, this is actually all Port Credit, they're all Stonehooker homes. So those generations of families that, because of course in the day, I think a lot of the homes were handed down, and not like the real estate of today. But this is just an example of some of the different homes that are still standing that were built and occupied by stonehookers. One of them actually functions as a restaurant. If you're ever in for a quaint meal, enjoyable, delicious, but very quaint, it's not a big restaurant, but it is in the James Pier house, which is on John Street South, right behind the Starbucks in Port Credit. So why did we attach ourselves to this story? What am I doing here? Well, obviously I've developed a real interest in the whole stonehooking industry, the stonehooking story, and obviously it became a brand for us. This is what existed on the south side of Lakeshore, just east of Cawthra, this is kind of a picture from shortly after we moved in. You can see we papered the windows, and we found that the stonehooking story was a good one, and it's one that's resonated and helped build our brand. This is what it tends to look like today in the summer. This one's, I think this shot's a couple years old. There's still a couple of people wearing masks. So we now have a beer garden that has 38 tables and holds almost 200 people. So my little shameless plug for Stonehooker is to invite you and have you come and join us and live today's modern Stonehooker story. Thank you. So we launched our company in 2019, and as you can see with the tap room, we tried to recreate a nautical atmosphere. We have 2 masts, we have bar top and gunnels and wood, and lots of rope. We didn't know what to do with the ceiling. It wasn't going to be blue sky. Instead, we said, well, let's turn the boat over. So the ceiling is actually representative of a keel, and the frames in a schooner.
Yeah.
And the back of the brewery looks a little bit different, not so traditional, but more of a working brewery, as you can see. So we tie ourselves to this brand, and we pay reverence to the Stonehooker age with a product that's pure, natural, and made from all natural ingredients. We do make it from scratch. We're very proud of our product, and I think we're proud to be associated with the Stonehookers because they were hardworking people. The Four Sisters, this is another YouTube video that I'm not going to play, but if you ever want to see the Four Sisters go down, everybody knows what the Four Sisters were. And the reason I've added this to my presentation is that the Four Sisters are no more, and they gave way to a big plot of land, 250 acres, that is now owned by a consortium of developers. And they're building a small city there. And so the right-hand side of the picture here, the right-hand picture, that's representative of the community that they're going to be building. And that's a future that we're working towards. We're building our brand, we're building our brewery, and we're building our connection with the community the Lakeview developers have seen that we have that connection with the community, and so they've offered us a front row seat. So we're being asked to locate our brew pub right there,
Nice.
right on the lakefront. I know it's gonna be expensive, so when you see the stock options come out, be a part of it. And that's kind of an aerial view, so you're probably familiar with this to a degree. Port Credit Yacht Club's in here, and you've seen those piers before. Especially if you see them at the last minute, and they really remind you, pay attention. But that's the vision. And that's where we hope to be.
And they call it Lakeview Village, that's.
Lakeview Village, that's right, yeah. That's an aerial view. That's the vision that the developer has. Of course, we actually want to be on the other side of the building. This side's in the shade afternoon every day. But that's the future of Lakeview. And we continue to carry the torch to celebrate the history of the stonehooking story in the industry. And I thank you for listening to my presentation, especially after you've eaten. I didn't see anyone fall asleep, so that's great. And did you want to, yeah, I was going to say if anybody has any questions. All right, so just in case anyone didn't hear the answer to that question, is how large were the stones that they were picking up? And where were they picking them up from? So the stonehookers would basically go for the low hanging fruit, and it depended on the weather. So as the easy pickings got scooped up, they'd have to go deeper and deeper. So then they'd use tools to do that. Stonehooking rakes were typically they would be a iron claw that was forged by a blacksmith, and they would have like about a 12-foot shaft on it. The blacksmith that made a small fortune producing these was a fellow by the name of Sam Adams, who was a black man who had come in through the Underground Railroad and settled in Oakville. Because we know that part of Oakville's story is to be a destination for the Underground Railroad, and that's where he set up shop, and he was producing rakes for stonehookers for that purpose. Sure, go right ahead.
Is there any special design for this stonehooking ship, or the first loaded on the platform that you showed us, and then put onto the ship, or the ship designed to be a stonehooker?
So the stonehooking ships or schooners, they were built mostly by the individual that started out into the industry. In some cases, they were repurposed. They might have been used for some other purposes before. And some of them were barges. And to get into the business, you need to have something that could carry stone, and you needed to have it rigged so that you could sail in its wrong. Remember, there's no auxiliaries, and there's no engines to power these things, so you have to be able to sail. So the common characteristic for all of them is that they were schooner rigged. So 2 masts, triangular sails, but the hulls on these ships could range from scows to what would look like more of a hull like we would know, like a mono hull that we would appreciate today. But that came down to whoever was building them, and they would build them in all the harbors and the river mouths, and so on, all the way from Cobert to Burlington. Well, they built them from scratch as well. So they were felling the trees when they would set up in a river mouth. And usually they build these things over the winter so that they could launch in the spring. And typically what they would do is they build a shanty. There's no building code back then. You don't have to get building permits. So they just build a bunch of shanties, and the blacksmiths would set up shop. because you needed a blacksmith, you'd have to have shipwrights. And then there'd be people felling trees and milling the lumber, and it was the whole operation. And that was how they did it.
Yes,
It's not a question, it's a statement. You're in the brewery business and over in the distillery district, they had a large amount of brewing beer and spirits. So they had 10,000 cows or something, and they fed them the mash from the after it was used to make the beer. And of course, that polluted the waters and people got sick. Until we were able to chlorinate the water. So that's one point, because you're a brewery and they were a brewery, so that sort of ties it in. And then there's another building that I leased out, the Alton Mill. And when I checked the when I checked the description of the land, it said that the land around the pond, the mill pond, was the width of an ox cart. So when you get on a streetcar is the width of an ox cart, because before there were real streetcars, the ruts made by the ox cart were a certain width. And now the streetcars that were designed so they're the width of an ox cart.
thank you, Ron. Lovely little tidbit of trivia there.
There you go.
I have a question about the size, I guess. How do you know the difference between a stone and a piece of shale? I ask because my house was built in 1911 and I indeed have stone walls in the basement. I don't know whether it's stone or if it's shale. You any idea about that?
Well, I'm gonna say that shale is stone.
Okay,
Yeah, Dundas shale is sedimentary rock. It's typically a layer that's like that,
yes, so it's,
and it was broken up. And so the typical pieces of Dundas shale are that rock layer that's been broken up and it's now in smaller pieces. So it qualifies as stone for sure. Julia, go ahead and mute yourself.
Jordan. Unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question. You're not unmuted. You have to unmute yourself.
Did they actually use a hook? Where did they get the name Stonehookers?
Yes. The answer is yes. They
And
did use
what kind of a hook?
the hook. It could also be termed a rake. So I think the hook was more the action of raking the stones off the bottom. So they were hooking stone. In some cases, they were using crowbars just to free up the stone to pop them up. Been there, done that. And then once the stones are free, they're easier to move.
So the boats were called Stonehookers and the men were called Stonehookers as well?
Well, good question. So the captains who typically owned the schooner and owned the business of that schooner, they were known as stonehookers. So that's the business they were in. And the ship itself was known as a stonehooker. A lot of times, as of course people shorten they go with the shorter forms, they would look out onto the lake and they just say, oh, there's a few hookers out there. And the men that worked, usually men, there's some infrequent, but there were some exceptions where there were women on board, and there's some stories that go with that. I'll tell you like in a second, like the men were known as hooker. Hooker, yeah. And the one exception that I can think of a woman was this, there was a family called the Blower family. Just like it sounds, the last name was Blower. They lived in Port Credit. Their home is still standing in Port Credit. And the matriarch of the family, she was left with 7 kids, and her husband passed. He was the Stonehooker, and that was their livelihood. So when he passed away, she had 7 mouths to feed. She went out there and she took over the business of stonehooking. So she actually kept one of the ships.
Good on her, good on her.
Am I still live? Because I haven't finished my question or my statement. I think Diane knows where I'm coming from. Crocheters are known as hookers. And quilters are known as strippers.
Oh.
Strippers.
I'm done.
Thanks, Julia.
Thank you for that.
This is more of an observation than a question, but the Dundas shale contributed to the Toronto construction industry after the era of the stonehookers, and overlapped to a degree. The Great Fire of Toronto in 1904 changed fire regulations in the city, and much more construction was done with brick. And my father worked for a brick company in South Etobicoke that had an open pit digging shale there. And there was another one, Cookstone Brick, out at Mavis Road in Dundas and so on. And I think other brick companies along the waterfront are all harvesting or mining shale for brick works.
Wow. After this.
I'm trying to envision, in fact, that it was illegal to build a wooden house after a certain period. And they used brick or stone, but I'm trying to envision these hooked stones. And are they like, if you're building a patio, you're using these flat stones, is that the kind of thing we're talking about here?
Yes.
That was a yes. Okay, Seamus, you're on. Make sure you're unmuted.
Just gonna bring a couple in for you today. My bag
was heavy enough, so you bring stones.
Hello?
Go ahead,
Hello?
Seamus.
Oh, you can hear me?
If you can.
Thank you, Ross, for a very interesting presentation. And I'm very impressed to know that well, I live now about 14K from Port Credit, but I'm living not far from what's unique to Canadian history. I noticed that the Yanks on the other side of the lake, they didn't have a stonehooker industry. Is that correct?
That is correct, yeah.
Okay, so it's a first for Canada, and also to complement Diane's observation that it's also a first for most likely North American women in North America to be single moms with 7 kids and successfully run a business. Anyway, Noel, I wish you and the lady who's helping you, Janice Alton, with the idea of a Stonehooker monument would be ideal in Port Credit, and I wish you every continued success with Stonehookers Brewery. And I liked your story about Jeff Coots, if I have the name right.
Fred Coots.
And that you have the Stonehooker model in your tavern. And I wish you every continued success with your venture. And maybe enough of us will still be around when the venture's ready, and we can visit you in the on the waterfront down near where the Four Sisters used to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Seamus, and yes, thank you for thank you for your kind words, and we would like to see all of you, not just later when we're on the waterfront in Lakeview, but we have a tap room that's open 6 days a week, and you're welcome anytime.
And the summers and the warm weather is coming, so, okay, Jen, you have a comment.
A comment and a question. Will the stock be publicly available on by looking at BMO Investing? And the second, to Julia's comment, the term hooker, as it refers to ladies, originates from General George Hooker's army in the Civil War, who came up and parked at south of Washington, D.C., and the camp followers were known as hookers, ladies, and that's the origin of the term hooker.
Thank you, Jim.
Right.
Always has interesting tidbits for us.
I didn't know that.
That's very interesting. I've been researching the word, the etymology of that word, and I've got one of those great big dictionaries. Which one it is, but you know, a foot thick. Yeah, Webster's anyway. And that when you go back and you look up the word hooker, it has no reference to women at all. It talks about the position in a rugby scrum, middle players or hooker, and talks about people that hook carpets. And the term as it applies to the nautical theme that we're talking about, I think originated on the East Coast, where small trawlers and small schooners were referred to as hookers because they're typically used to pull up lobster traps. So if you see a lobster hooker, that makes perfect sense. And that's how they refer to them on the East Coast.
I'm learning a lot today, Marlene.
Not publicly, but if you contact me, we can fix that.
Just have a quick question. You talked about actually putting stone yourself for your patio and for the tap room. How deep was it when you were working on it?
More than 3 rods.
Yeah,
I could be incriminating myself here, so I may have violated the 3-rod law. What I found was that it's slim pickings because most of the easy pickings over the course of a few generations were pulled away. Remember how many tons of stone that they delivered. As a result, most of the shoreline from here to there, with some exceptions, is now completely rebuilt and has no resemblance to the shoreline that there was in the 1800s. The exceptions are the mouth of Cooksville Creek, because they built that up because it's a creek. So anywhere where there's a river mouth can potentially have that kind of beach still there, unless it's been built up. So Port Credit no longer shows, there's no shingle beach left at Port Credit, but Cooksville Creek there is. And also the Rattray Marsh, there's some beach area there. But they're few and far between where the stone presents itself on the beach, and then it gets back to how deep do you want to go. I know that when I'm taking the boat out of the harbor at Lake Shore, if it's a clear day, and you know we have very clear water some days, thanks to our little friends, the zebra mussels, and you can look down and you can see it. It's all there. But now I'm in 15 feet of water and I'm not really inclined to go down and pick up stone. So I will say that most of the stone, all of the stone that I harvested was fairly easily accessible.
Okay, we'll have two more questions, comments, and then we will close. And if you have any more, you can talk personally to the speaker.
Just a quick addition, in early epidemiological studies, they found in England that people who drank the water got sick, but people who drank the beer were safe.
You're safe the world.
I just want to say, in defense of women, this is actually with some authority, that during the 1800s, women were not kept in the house the way we think. In fact, it was very common for women to own taverns and pubs and to own industries, factories, and so on. So this woman who had the children and was the captain of the ship is not an anomaly.
What was the cost for the fund this year?
Oh, okay.
There's a business question. How much? We put 30 tons of stone on the deck of the ship. How do they measure it and how do I get paid? So they would put together what they call a toise of stone. And if you can think of a cord of wood, it's kind of the equivalent in terms of sizes. I think it was 3 feet by 6 feet by 12 feet. So 3 feet, 6, 12. Anyway, that was the approximate dimensions of a toise stone, and it would weigh about 6 tons. And they would get $3 to $5 per toise. But it would go a long way back then.
That was in the 1800s then we're talking about it.
Yeah.
Actually, yes, it should. The size of a choice.
Well, yeah, they would put 5 toises on a bigger stone.
How many choices would they get on a ship, on a schooner?
30 tons, so about 5 toises,
5 choices on. a
depending on
schooner.
the size.
Of course, depending on the size of. I have a little token for you. And I should have taken this out sooner, just hang on. A token of our appreciation. A schooner, well, a tall ship.
I like that.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Ross. That was wonderful.
Thank you, Diane.
Learned so much, and I'm sure you will have a few people visiting your tavern. That's what you call it, a tavern or a pub?
We call it a tap room.
A tap room, okay, a tap room. Before it gets transferred over to that wonderful new space. Because I like your upside down phone. Yeah.
Well, that'll still be open even when we go outside.
Yeah, show that meeting there, maybe we'll do that down the line. Okay, thank you so much.
I have one last request.
I just have one last request. Our industry is very hardworking, just like the Stonehookers. And we do try to be good to the environment as well. And most of all, we provide a product which is a real honest product. It's all natural. You know what, you can see it being made at our brewery. It's made from all natural ingredients. It's a great product. We love it. And we know many people love it. But we need the support of the public. It's beer tends to be a commodity, and people have grown up buying beer from the big brewers, which are all foreign-owned breweries. We need to give the Ontario breweries a chance. So my plug is for Ontario craft breweries. There's over 300 of them, of us, that are Ontario independently owned. And we need your support. So when all you have to do is just ask for it. When you go to a bar, go to a pub, go to a restaurant, and they ask you, what would you like to drink? And if you're a beer drinker, simple, just say, do you have something that's local? Do you have a local craft beer? And if enough of us ask for it, then we're gonna, as an industry and as businesses, we're gonna survive and we're gonna prosper. But if we fall. You know, it's very easy to fall by the wayside and just order the same old. And it doesn't help the Ontario industry. This is a great industry for Ontario, so we're counting on your support. Thank you.
Let's give them a nice big round of applause. Thank you so much for this wonderful list. So your meal is on the table. Please help yourself to it.